Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Jack didn't mind. Instead, he flashed a meaningful grin. Don't thank me first. I'm giving you these presents because I have a favor to ask. Hearing that, the kids immediately put up their guard. Roxanne was similarly baffled. This is only his second time meeting the children. What favor does he have to ask from them? Just as she was wondering, she noticed Jack looking at her, causing her to be startled. The next second, he looked at the kids again and said, "I need to borrow your mommy for a while. Is that all right?" The kids exchanged glances, having already expected that to happen. "We knew it. He's here to take mommy away again. If Daddy knows about this, I wonder how long Mommy and Daddy's next fight will last before they reconcile." At that thought, the kids shook their heads without hesitation and uttered matter-of-factly, "Mommy promised to bring us out to have fun today. Adults shouldn't lie to children." Hearing that, Jack shot Roxanne a surprised look. Roxanne was instantly caught in a tight spot. She fathomed Jack must be there to take her away because of work-related matters. The only thing she didn't know was the severity of the issue. Jack explained solemnly, "I've tried my best to acquire more time from Mr. LaCroix. Herb's Cape group will be sealed for investigation at 10 o'clock in the morning. Before that happens, we can still enter the premises to bring out whatever material we need to facilitate and ease our subsequent research. This is also why I came here so early this morning." Roxanne tensed up after listening to his elaboration. "I didn't notice anything unusual about his behavior or ask him any questions about his arrival. Since we're so short on time, why did he waste so much time telling me all those things earlier?" Sensing the urgency of the circumstances, Roxanne immediately persuaded her children, "Darlings, I must leave now. You two stay at home obediently and wait for me to come home. I'll definitely bring you out to play, okay?" Archie and Benny were reluctant to let Roxanne leave. Still, because it was a work-related problem, they couldn't come up with an excuse to refuse her. After saying that to her kids, Roxanne got up to leave. The boys grew more anxious as they could tell Roxanne was about to leave the house. Benny hastily tugged at Archie's sleeves, hinting at the latter to think of a solution. Although they were equally smart, Archie was better at keeping his composure most of the time. Archie frowned and cautiously stole a glance at Jack and Roxanne after receiving Benny's signal. When he saw that the adults weren't paying attention to them, he swiftly gestured at Benny with a significant look and mouthed at his brother to pretend to be sick. Archie was confident that Roxanne would prioritize their health over her work. The boys shared a tacit understanding. Benny swiftly grasped his brother's intention and crouched on the floor, grimacing and clutching his stomach. Archie glanced at Roxanne, who had reached the door, before turning to look at Benny and exclaiming, "What's wrong with you, Benny?" Hearing his voice, Roxanne stopped in her tracks and turned around. Her heart lurched when she saw Benny crouching on the floor and hugging his stomach. She strode up to him at once. What's the matter? Are you feeling unwell?" Benny sniffled and gazed at her pitifully. "Mommy, my stomach is hurting so badly." Roxanne knitted her brows and stared at Benny confusedly for some time. "He was fine just now. Why is his stomach hurting all of a sudden? He seems to be in a lot of pain." Archie, standing aside, sensed his mother's doubt. His eyes gleamed and he hurriedly frowned as well. "Perhaps we caught a cold when sleeping last night. My stomach is a little upset too." Roxanne was finally convinced after hearing that. She turned to look at Jack apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Damaris. The kids are not feeling well. I need to check on them." Jack sized up Archie and Benny before grinning considerately. "Their health is important. I don't mind waiting a little longer." You can summon me anytime if you need assistance. Jack was almost as skilled as Roxanne in medical practice. Not only that, but he also had a few years of experience in providing medical consultations to children. He was very knowledgeable in diagnosing children's conditions. Archie and Benny exchanged a panicky look when they heard Jack's offer to help. They nearly forgot that he was also an incredible physician. Their pretense of being sick would be exposed if Jack was the one to examine them, and they reckoned Roxanne wouldn't be pleased to find out about their deceit. While the boys contemplated on the way to reject Jack's kind gesture, Roxanne said, "It's fine. I'm more familiar with the condition of their bodies anyway. Please sit in the living room for a while, Mr. Damaris. I'll come downstairs right after I'm done treating them." Jack nodded indifferently and reoccupied the seat on the couch. The boys let out an inward sigh of relief after Roxanne turned down the offer in their stead. Then they compliantly followed her upstairs. A helpless look spread across Roxanne's face as she led her sons into the bedroom. She had noticed the changes in their facial expressions when Jack had volunteered to help. Naturally, she could guess that Archie and Benny were probably lying. Nevertheless, Roxanne was still a little worried, so she told the kids to lie on the bed and began to examine their bodies. "Can you point out which part of your stomach is hurting?" She stood beside Benny and gazed at him concernedly. Of course, Benny wasn't feeling any pain. However, since there was no turning back, he could only brace himself and gesture randomly. "All these places are hurting." After saying that, he questioned his mother piteously, "Mommy, am I very sick?" Looking at the places pointed out by Benny, Roxanne felt utterly helpless. If these places were really hurting, he would have been beyond treatment a long time ago. Still, if I expose him now, he probably won't learn the lesson and will resort to tricking me with this method again in the future. With that thought in her mind, she feigned seriousness and grasped Benny's wrist. She checked his pulse and pressed various spots on his stomach while asking him about his signs and symptoms. Benny felt ticklish because of the way his mother was applying pressure on his abdomen. Still, he contained the urge to laugh and complained that all the spots she touched were painful. Roxanne thought Benny was quite pitiable for having to suppress his laughter. Ultimately, she stopped tormenting him and loosened her grip while wearing a solemn facial expression. "Mommy," Archie called out warily to his mother when he noticed her unusual countenance, thinking that she had seen through their falsehood. Roxanne furrowed her brows and looked at Benny worriedly. "There's a chance you're suffering from acute appendicitis. You'll need to undergo surgery as soon as possible. Don't be afraid. I'll send you to the hospital right away." With that, she pretended as if she was going to lift Benny in her arms. The colors drained from Benny's face after he heard his mother say he needed surgery. "Mommy." Benny's voice trembled slightly as he attempted to conceal his fear. Do I have to go for the surgery?" Roxanne nodded fervently. "Your acute appendicitis will only worsen if you don't, and you'll be in even more pain. I'm worried about you." Benny hesitated for several seconds and gradually removed his hand from his stomach. "Mommy, I'm feeling much better. I'm perfectly fine now. Let's not go for the surgery, please." Roxanne shook her head at once. Archie and Benny eyed one another. Their eyes were full of fear and regret. Archie tugged at the hem of Roxanne's shirt gingerly and said obediently, "Mommy, we're both sorry for lying to you just now. I was the one who asked Benny to pretend to be sick. Please don't bring him for surgery." Benny got down from the bed and stood before Roxanne guiltily as well. Roxanne looked down at Archie and Benny and sighed internally before ruffling their hair. "Have you learned from your mistake?" They hurriedly nodded. Roxanne crouched down to their eye level and asked patiently, "Can both of you tell me why you felt the need to lie?" Archie and Benny exchanged glances again and were at a loss for words. Roxanne waited silently and didn't pester them for an answer. "Because We don't like Mr. Damaris, Benny admitted apprehensively, then carefully observed Roxanne's expression. A look of surprise flashed across Roxanne's eyes. She had assumed the children had pretended to be sick to prevent her from leaving. Little did she know it had nothing to do with that altogether. This was the second time she'd heard Benny and Archie actively disliking someone. Previously, it was Aubrey, as they'd witnessed her and Frida causing trouble for her. However, Jack had always been kind to both her and the children. She could not comprehend why they'd say such a thing. Can you tell me why you don't like Mr. Damaris? Roxanne asked in puzzlement. Benny and Archie pursed their lips and did not give a reason.
No idea.
We just don't like him. Roxanne furrowed her brows and looked at them earnestly. You can't say that. No matter what the reason is, you have to give me one. Otherwise, I won't be able to decline Mr. Damaris' kind offers on your behalf in the future. Benny frowned in reluctance and lowered his head further at that. They couldn't possibly reveal that it was because Jack would steal Roxanne from Lucian. Roxanne tried her luck on Archie instead at Benny's reticence. Archie said innocently, "The reason is that ever since you met Mr. Damaris, you've been spending far lesser time with us. This happened yesterday and today as well." His words hit Roxanne's sore spot. She'd indeed been busy with work after knowing Jack and had neglected her children. Lucian had even confronted her about it the day before. Roxanne immediately felt apologetic toward Benny and Archie and didn't even doubt the veracity of their words. "Mommy, can you stay and accompany us today?" The children once again played the sympathy card. Roxanne caressed Benny's and Archie's heads. "I'm sorry, but I have important work that requires immediate attention. Both of you have heard that the company is going to be seized shortly. I have to take a trip there no matter what." The two children stared at the ground in sullen silence. They knew how important work meant to her. However, they still detested the fact that she would be spending time with Jack in the process. Roxanne felt apologetic yet confused as she took in the children's reluctant looks. The children didn't mind when she was up to her neck with work overseas. They didn't even utter a word of complaint when she was occupied with finding a medicinal herbs company for the research institute when she was back in the country. "What is it this time? Mommy, are you going to let Mr. Damaris become our daddy?" Benny blurted out. Roxanne paused for several seconds and finally understood the children's concerns. She did not know whether to be amused or upset as she assured them, "Mr. Damaris and I are work partners, nothing more. He's like the others you've met when we were overseas." She locked her eyes on both Benny and Archie intensely. Both of you need not worry. I'll ask for your opinions first if I ever have any plans to do so. I won't let someone you dislike become your daddy." The weight on the children's hearts had finally been lifted as they inclined their heads compliantly. Roxanne let out a sigh of relief now that Benny and Archie understood her. Checking the time and seeing that it was getting late, Roxanne got to her feet and patted Benny's and Archie's heads affectionately. "I'd better get going, or it'd affect my work. Both of you, wait for me at home. I'll be back soon. We'll go out together and have fun later." They promised to be obedient and apologized to Roxanne once more. "We're sorry for scaring you just now, Mommy." Roxanne smiled. "It's all right as long as you're aware of your mistakes. Don't hesitate to tell me anything next time and don't pretend to be sick again. I'll be worried." The children agreed to that. Then Roxanne turned to make her way downstairs. Jack was sitting on the couch downstairs. He got to his feet at the sight of her and asked, "How are the children?" Roxanne gave a sheepish grin as she recalled the children's words. They might have gotten a cold last night. I gave them some medicine and told them to get some rest." Jack inclined his head slightly. If that's the case, you need not trouble yourself. I can head to Herbscape Group myself." It's all right. We'll just come back sooner." Jack did not bother convincing her any further and assented at once. Meanwhile,
Lucian left the Farwell residence in a hurry without eating breakfast. Estella lost her appetite and was fuming, as she didn't get to finish saying what she wanted to say. Catalina tried coaxing her for some time, but she shook her head stubbornly and refused to open her mouth. Miss Estella. Catalina glanced at Estella helplessly. Estella raised her head and looked at Catalina pitifully. Miss Catalina, I want to go and play with Archie and Benny. She had no idea how to tell her father that she needed help from the brothers. Catalina's heart went out to Estella. However, she had no choice but to feign ignorance as she recalled Lucian's orders before he left the premises.
Estella's mood turned sullen when Catalina didn't respond. A few minutes later, Catalina gave in and explained, Mr. Farwell is very busy these days. He ordered me to make sure that you stay at home obediently. If you want to go anywhere, you'll have to ask him when he's back. The thought of her father had Estella turn her head to the side in frustration. Catalina let out a sigh and called Lucian. Lucian was having a meeting at the office when his phone vibrated. Seeing Catalina's name flashing across the screen, he hesitated briefly before leaving the room to take the call. What is it? Catalina shot a glance at the still upset Estella before speaking into the phone. Ms. Estella has been sulking since morning, Mr. Farwell, and she didn't even touch her breakfast. When Estella heard Catalina talking to her father on the phone, she slowly turned around and stared at the phone. She wanted to talk to her father too. Noticing Estella's intention, Catalina passed her the phone. Lucian was about to ask for the reason when he heard his daughter's voice. Daddy, I want to play with Archie and Benny. Estella's voice reflected her surly mood. When Lucian recalled Estella's anxious and sad expression before he left for work that morning, his heart softened. Yet remembering Roxanne's ruthlessness had him frowning with displeasure. Ms. Jarvis is very busy lately, so be a good girl and stay at home, okay? Don't create trouble for Ms. Jarvis. Estella harumphed. Lucian rubbed his temples, feeling the throbbing in his head. Be good. I'll bring you to the amusement park after work. No. Estella pouted. I want to play with Archie and Benny. Lucian looked toward the conference room and coaxed, I still have some work to do. We'll talk about this tonight. Naturally, Estella wouldn't take his words seriously after last night's incident. Not only did she defy him, she even moved the topic to something that worsened Lucian's headache. You said you were going to make Ms. Jarvis my mommy. Why are you not letting me go and play at her house? You're just angry at her. Estella brought up the issue she had raised that morning. Lucian didn't reply to her and merely scrunched up his brows. He was unsatisfied with Roxanne, but if Estella found out about it, surely she would blame him. Yet he didn't want to lie to her. Estella knew her father's character. She sniffled and her eyes turned red. Hearing her sniffle, Lucian said resignedly, I'll help you find a mommy. It won't necessarily be Ms. Jarvis, but I'm sure you'll like her. No. Tears started streaming down Estella's cheeks as she sobbed, I want Ms. Jarvis. I only want her. Bad daddy. Catalina didn't expect that a phone call would send the child into a crying fit. She hurried over to Estella's side to comfort her. What's wrong, Ms. Estella? Alas, Cataline's soothing words fell on deaf ears as Estella began bawling harder. Lucian's brows creased when he heard the chaos on the other side. Catalina, please look after Estella. I'll be right back. Okay. After hanging up the call, Lucian strode back into the conference room, handed over his position as the chairperson of the meeting to his vice president, and raced back to the Farwell residence. When Lucian returned to the Farwell residence, Estella was no longer in the living room and Catalina was nowhere to be found. Mr. Farwell. He reached for his phone, about to call Catalina when she came down the stairs with a grim expression. His eyebrows drew together as he asked, "Where's Essie?" Catalina pointed at Estella's room on the second floor and said, "Miss Estella has locked herself in her room again. I don't know how to get her out." Estella had been crying nonstop since the call ended. No matter how much Catalina consoled her, she refused to calm down. After bawling for a while, Estella abruptly picked herself up and dashed to her room upstairs. Catalina's reaction was merely slower by a split second. By the time she reached the second floor, Estella had already locked herself in her room. No matter what Catalina said, Estella would not open her door. At first, Catalina could still hear Estella's muffled sobs. But the muffled crying died down after a while, leaving only silence. Catalina panicked and called Lucian, but Lucian didn't pick up any of her calls. She wanted to get the keys to Estella's room but had no idea where Lucian kept them. Just as she was losing hope, she heard movement at the front door. Catalina rushed down the stairs, hoping it was Lucian at the front door, and relief flooded her at the sight of him. Lucian frowned after hearing about Estella's behavior. He marched up the stairs without changing into indoor slippers. Catalina hurriedly trailed after him and they stood at the door to Estella's room. Lucian suppressed the unease pricking his chest and knocked on the door. "Open up, Essie. I'm home." There was no movement inside. Lucian glanced at Catalina with a furrow between his eyebrows. Anxiety crossed Catalina's face. "It's been like this for a while now. I think you should get the key for the door, Mr. Farwell." Perhaps Estella heard Catalina's suggestion as something hit the door hard right after. Obviously, Estella didn't want them entering her room. Catalina was worried and felt sorry for Estella. "Miss Estella, please calm down and talk it out with Mr. Farwell. He has always loved you very much." Another thud sounded at the door. Lucian frowned at her tantrum and silently left to grab the keys in his study. The second he cracked the door open, a doll flew toward him. Lucian moved to the side, letting the doll fly over his shoulder and out the door, finally landing by Catalina's feet. Catalina looked down at the doll on the floor and distress filled her eyes. It was Estella's favorite doll when she was younger. She had never thrown it before when she was ill, even during her worst fits of anger. Comprehension dawned on Catalina that Estella was beyond furious. Lucian walked into the room and saw that Estella had curled herself up in the corner of her bed. Seeing that Lucian had entered, Estella buried her head between her knees in anger. She didn't want Lucian to see her expression. At a glance, Lucian felt as if time had turned back to Estella's autistic days. His heart sank, but it didn't stop him from approaching her. He crossed the room slowly to sit down beside her. "I know you're mad at me for not listening to you, but I'm indeed busy these days. Can you forgive me?" Estella shook her head silently. "Not only did Daddy not listen to me, he even went back on his word during the call earlier. He promised me he would make Ms. Jarvis my mommy, but now he's saying my mommy won't necessarily be Ms. Jarvis. Bad Daddy."
Lucian felt helpless upon seeing how unperturbed Estella was by what he said. Ever since the little girl got close to Roxanne, she had been practicing double standards and treating her better than him. What Roxanne did last night was too much, but Essie still decided to forgive her. Yet, Essie is mad at me for not paying attention to all the good things she said about that woman. She isn't even listening to me anymore. Had Lucian not learned that Roxanne was Estella's biological mother, he might have had difficulty accepting the double standards. After a short while, Lucian suppressed his grievance and comforted the little girl. Didn't you say you have something to tell me? I'm all ears now." Estella lifted her head and glanced at him. Lucian's eyes darkened, and his heart sank when he saw the expression on her face. He thought she did not give him any response because she was upset. However, when she lifted her head, he realized her cheeks were stained with tears. "A bad daddy," Estella said in between sobs, feeling utterly aggrieved. Lucian was stunned by her reaction. Instead of upsetting the little girl further, he nodded and tried pacifying her. Yes, it's all my fault. He wanted to go near Estella to wipe off her tears, but she took a few steps back as if she was avoiding a monster. The man's hand was left hanging mid-air. Her reaction now instantly reminded him again of the time when she was autistic. Estella might have started conversing with people, but at that moment, she was acting like how she did in the past. I don't want Daddy. The little girl burst into tears. I want Miss Jarvis. Lucian's eyes darkened. Seeing Estella crying non-stop, Catalina immediately looked at Lucian and suggested, Mr. Farwell, why don't you give Mrs. Farwell a call? She thought it might be helpful for Estella to listen to Roxanne's voice. Lucian's gaze turned even darker when he heard how Catalina addressed Roxanne, but he knew he had to do something to calm Estella down. After remaining silent for a few seconds, Lucian took out his phone and dialed Roxanne's number. Meanwhile, Roxanne had arrived at the entrance of Herbscape Group. Before this, Jack had informed Dean they were coming. By the time they arrived, Dean was already waiting for them in the lobby. Hello, Mr. Damaris. Nice to see you, Dr. Jarvis. Dean greeted them respectfully. Roxanne could not help but feel ironic when she noticed the change in his attitude. The last time when they met at the agreement signing ceremony between Herbscape Group and Damaris Group, Roxanne remembered Dean was still all high and mighty. At that time, Dean viewed himself as the equal partner of Damaris Group. Yet, everything seemed to have changed in the blink of an eye after yesterday's incident. Jack responded to his greeting with a gentle nod. Then, in an icy voice, he asked, are we ready? Their interaction at the entrance could have easily misled people into believing Jack was Dean's superior. Dean, who did not seem to be bothered by Jack's attitude, played along. Yes, everything's ready. You can collect the items after signing the document. With a grateful look, he added, Mr. Damaris, I want to thank you for what you did last night. And don't worry. As long as Herbscape Group can overcome this crisis, we'll follow your commands and do everything as you say. A corner of Jack's lips quirked up. The 1,200 million I forked out last night do make a big difference. He was not surprised by Dean's humble behavior that day. Oblivious to what had happened between the two men last night, Roxanne kept mum and stood behind Jack. The moment they stepped into Herbscape Group, Roxanne's phone rang. The two men stopped walking and turned around to look at her. Roxanne responded with an apologetic smile before fishing out her phone from her pocket. Her expression stiffened when she saw the caller's name on the screen. What's wrong? Are the kids not feeling well? Jack expressed his concern. Roxanne froze for a bit upon hearing that. After regaining her composure, she hung up the phone and smiled. It's not an urgent matter. Let's sign the papers first, shall we? Jack and Dean did not think much. They turned around and continued walking. However, Roxanne's phone rang again after she took a few steps. Her heart sank when she saw the name on the screen. This time, she apologized to Jack and Dean. I'm sorry. I have to take this call. Please proceed without me. I'll catch up with you shortly. After bobbing her head at the men, Roxanne turned around, walked to the entrance, and answered the call. Before she could speak, she heard Estella wailing from the other end of the phone. What's wrong? What happened to Essie? Roxanne was worried about the little girl. Lucian suppressed his displeasure and answered in a deep voice, she wants to see you. If you're available, please do me another favor. He could not help but brood over how quickly Roxanne had ended the first call he made. I don't know what she's thinking, but I believe she's throwing a tantrum. At the thought of that possibility, Lucian could not help but smirk. She was at fault, yet she had the audacity to hang up on me. After a short pause, Roxanne responded hesitantly, but I'm a little busy right now. The issuance of closure would take effect in less than 30 minutes. They had to work fast because any delay would cause all the items in Herbscape group to be discarded. Lucian's expression turned grim immediately. He did not take the rejection well. Upon noticing the change in his facial expression, Catalina instinctively took a step back. Essie has been crying the whole morning. Lucian was on the verge of exploding, but he still tried to contain his anger. Estella bawled more loudly when she realized Roxanne was reluctant to visit her. Hearing the little girl squeal over the phone broke Roxanne's heart. Nevertheless, she had no choice but to turn him down.
I'm sorry.
I'm caught up with work right now. Can you give me an hour? I'll rush over once I'm done here. Right after she spoke, Lucian responded icily. You don't have to if you're busy. Essie is just throwing a tantrum. You don't have to worry about her since you're not related to her anyway. Roxanne knitted her brows upon hearing that. That's not what I meant. Before she could defend herself, Lucian interrupted. Sorry for disturbing you. I'll handle Essie myself. Have a nice day. The man then hung up right away. Roxanne stared at the black screen, feeling anxious.
While Roxanne was in two minds over whether or not to hurry to the Farwell residence, Jack strode out with a document in his hand and called out, Miss Jarvis. She had no choice but to suppress the worry in her heart and quickly walked toward him. What's this? You didn't come in after some time, so I thought I'd bring out the document you needed to go through. You can take a look and sign it if there are no issues. Hearing that, she murmured her assent and checked the document carefully. A moment later, she looked up at Jack and nodded. Everything looks fine. Excellent, he said with a smile. You look a little upset. Did something happen? Recalling the sound of Estella's cries, Roxanne fell into a slight daze. Jack was puzzled when he saw that she did not respond after a long time. Miss Jarvis? Roxanne jolted to her senses and shot him an apologetic smile. These are the medicinal herbs we need. Is there anything else you need my help with? Jack shook his head. Seeing that, Roxanne took her leave immediately. I'll have to trouble you to take care of the rest then. I have to attend to some urgent business, so I'll head off now. Observing the expression on her face, Jack agreed in a non-committal way. Since it's something urgent, you should get going. Roxanne nodded at him gratefully before turning and hurrying away. Jack watched her leave with a deeply perplexed look in his eyes. I wonder what happened to make her so worried. Archie and Benny didn't look so well when we left her house this morning. However, based on my experience after practicing medicine for years, they're most likely faking it. I couldn't be bothered to figure out the reason for it, but from the looks of it now, it appears as though I made an error in judgment. What else could get her that worked up apart from her children and work? As that thought crossed his mind, he laughed at himself. I can't believe there'd come a time when I'd make an error in judgment. Mr. Damaris, do you have any other instructions for us? Dean asked as he walked out of the building a moment later. Puzzled to see Jack all alone, he inquired, Where's Miss Jarvis? Jack snapped out of his thoughts and glanced at Dean expressionlessly. He handed the list he was holding to the latter and said, Prepare the medicinal herbs listed here. Not daring to probe further, Dean immediately acceded. Then he went back into the building with the list to instruct the staff to complete the task as soon as possible. Over at the Farwell residence, Estella watched her father hang up the phone, her eyes wet with tears. When Lucian met her gaze, a pang shot through his heart and he felt annoyed at Roxanne. Essie has been crying her heart out and even heard Roxanne say she couldn't come over immediately. Even so, there's still a glimmer of hope in her eyes. If Roxanne saw the expression on Essie's face now, I wonder what she'd think. Would she feel guilty? When is Miss Jarvis coming over? Estella stretched her arms toward Lucian pitifully, sobbing so bitterly that she could hardly breathe. Lucian's heart ached as he drew the girl into his embrace. He was unsure of what to say. Even if Roxanne does come, she'll only get here an hour later. She may be fine with letting Essie cry for 1 hour, but I don't have the heart to do so. Daddy, Estella urged while shedding tears. Lucian stroked her head comfortingly and sidestepped the question. There. I'll take you to go look for Mr. Lon. At this point, the only other person apart from Roxanne who can stop her from crying is probably James. Roxanne left Herbscape Group and drove straight to the Farwell residence. Less than 20 minutes later, her Mercedes-Benz slowly rolled to a stop in front of the manor entrance. She rang the doorbell frantically, and it was not long before Catalina answered the intercom. Mrs. Catalina began without thinking when she saw the person on the screen. However, she quickly caught herself and changed what she was saying. Miss Jarvis. Too worried about Estella crying, Roxanne had no time to pay attention to the little details. Hurry up and let me in, Catalina. How's Essie? Catalina sighed inwardly when she saw how anxious Roxanne looked. You're too late. Mr. Lucian has taken Ms. Estella out. Roxanne's expression froze when she heard that reply. I thought Lucian only said that in a fit of anger. I can't believe he'd actually be so cruel. Since Essie hasn't seen me, she must still be bawling her eyes out. The thought of that brought Roxanne to her senses, and she asked in a low voice, Do you know where he took her? Catalina hesitated for a split second. However, the recollection of Lucian's parting instruction made her shake her head. The light in Roxanne's eyes went out and a wave of regret washed over her. If only I'd arrived a little earlier. Why don't you give Mr. Farwell a call? Catalina could not stop herself from suggesting. Although she felt bad for Estella when Roxanne did not promise to come over immediately, she could not bear to see the look on Roxanne's face. Indeed, Roxanne was so anxious that she had forgotten she could do so. Thanks to Catalina's reminder, she suddenly realized that was what she should do. Thank you. I'll call him right away. With that, she fished out her phone from her bag, pulled up Lucian's number, and made the call. However, as soon as the call connected, it was declined just as it started ringing. Then, the sound of a female computer-generated voice rang out. She tried calling again immediately, but the same thing happened several times. He's evidently angry at me. I'm afraid he probably won't pick up my calls for now. As the realization dawned on her, guilt welled within her. All I can do is try my luck and send Lucian a message. I wonder how Estella is. Meanwhile, Estella's cries grew louder and pierced the air whenever the phone rang as they made their way to James' clinic. Miss Jarvis. Nonetheless, Lucian remained unmoved and did not hesitate to decline the calls as soon as his phone rang. Despite hearing Estella's sobs, he denied that the calls were from Roxanne in a chilly tone. No, it's not Ms. Jarvis. She's still busy working. Estella's wails soon grew weaker again and gradually turned into whimpers. Lucian glanced at her through the rearview mirror and saw that although her cries were much softer, tears continued streaming down her cheeks. The sight of that caused his gaze to darken. Spotting the message notification that popped up on his phone screen, he frowned and swiftly dismissed it. Then he called to ask James to spare some time for him. Upon learning that Estella was unwell, James agreed at once. After ending the call, Lucian could not stop himself from tapping on the message Roxanne had sent. Roxanne, sorry for being late. Where are you and Essie? I'll rush over there immediately. A scornful look flashed in his eyes after he read the message. Then he closed the message interface. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.